name is Dylan Turman, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Oklahoma College of Law. Today, we'll explore the importance of Indigenous consent in strengthening sovereignty, particularly within the context of doing business in Indian country. We will begin by overviewing the evolution of Indigenous sovereignty and how, despite colonial efforts at assimilation, Indigenous people's sovereignty, culture, and traditions have endured. The knowledge put forward in this presentation draws upon a variety of sources, including historical accounts, legal and political frameworks, and contemporary case studies that serve as evidence to the importance of prioritizing Indigenous consent. We begin with a historical overview of the evolution of Indigenous sovereignty in North America. During the pre-colonial period, before European contact, Indigenous tribes thrived in North America for thousands of years. The Iroquois Confederacy, for example, developed a sophisticated political system known as the Great Law of Peace. This system united several tribes and emphasized collective decision-making and balance of power, influencing democratic principles later adopted by settlers. During early European contact, the arrival of Europeans brought devastating changes. Diseases like smallpox, to which Indigenous peoples had no immunity, decimated populations, leading to significant societal disruptions. Despite this, tribes resisted colonization, maintaining their ways of life and preserving their cultural practices. In the colonial era, as European settlers expanded westward, Indigenous tribes faced increasing pressure to cede their lands. Despite treaties often being broken, tribes used diplomacy and resistance to protect their sovereignty and continue their cultural traditions. During the formation of the United States and early republic, the newly formed U.S. government viewed tribes as obstacles to westward expansion. This led to more broken treaties and significant land loss. However, tribes adapted, kept their traditional knowledge alive, and resisted assimilation. The removal era would later ensue, sparking the Indian Removal Act, which forced many tribes from their homelands, resulting in immense suffering. Despite this, tribes rebuilt their societies in new territories and preserved their cultural identities. Following removal, assimilationist policies would ensue. Assimilationist policies such as the Dawes Act aimed to assimilate Indigenous peoples into American society by privatizing tribal lands. These policies led to the loss of millions of acres of tribal land and eroded Native American cultures and governance structures. The assimilation era also saw the reservation system and the boarding school initiatives. These systems of oppression represented widespread cultural erasure and attempts at conforming Native Americans into the prevailing culture. After immense policy failures on behalf of the American government, the self-determination era took root. The Indian Reorganization Act marked a significant shift in U.S. government policy, aiming to reverse the assimilationist policies imposed by the Dawes Act. This era saw a resurgence of tribal sovereignty and cultural revitalization. The self-determination era persists into modern day. Today, tribes assert their sovereignty and actively participate in U.S. politics. They use traditional knowledge to promote sustainable development and cultural preservation. The critical role of tribal sovereignty and Indigenous consent cannot be understated. Tribal nations are distinct governmental entities with immense autonomy over their governments, people, natural resources, and cultural practices. This sovereignty is not just a matter of historical or legal recognition, but a living, dynamic reality that continues to shape the relationships between tribes and other governmental and business entities today. Rebecca Sosi, a prominent Native scholar, underscores the importance of traditional Indigenous knowledge and consent with this powerful insight. This quote highlights the critical intersection of traditional knowledge and modern governance. It emphasizes that Indigenous values are not just historical artifacts, but living principles that can guide sustainable development and legal frameworks today. The confluence of Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge, particularly in government and business applications, creates a unique opportunity for collaboration and innovation. Indigenous knowledge, with its deep roots in sustainability, community, and respect for the natural world, offers invaluable perspectives that can complement and enhance Western approaches to governance and business practices. In government, this confluence can lead to more holistic and inclusive policy making. In business, the integration of Indigenous knowledge can drive innovation in sustainability practices, ethical decision-making, and community engagement. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples recognizes the principle of free, prior, and informed consent as a fundamental right of Indigenous peoples. FPIC ensures that Indigenous communities have the right to give or withhold consent to projects or policies that may affect their lands, resources, and livelihoods. Expanding upon FPIC, this belief is rooted in the historical injustices perpetrated against Indigenous peoples. For centuries, Indigenous communities have faced displacement, resource exploitation, and cultural erasure, often without their consent or involvement. These injustices have had devastating impacts on their lands, cultures, and ways of life, leading to a deep mistrust of external authorities and entities. In modern times, governments and private businesses have increasingly prioritized free, prior, and informed consent in their interactions with Indigenous communities. This shift reflects a growing recognition of the importance of respecting Indigenous sovereignty and ensuring that development projects and policies are conducted ethically and sustainably. A few relevant case studies highlight the importance of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous consent in modern development projects. First, we look to the Dakota Access Pipeline. This case serves as a significant example. The project faced widespread criticism for proceeding without securing the free, prior, and informed consent of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, whose land and water sources were directly threatened by the pipeline. The Standing Rock Sioux tribe and their allies raised concerns about the potential environmental impacts on their sacred lands and water supply. The lack of meaningful consultation and the disregard for the tribe's opposition led to significant legal battles and widespread protests. The case garnered international attention, drawing support from activists, environmentalists, and other Indigenous groups. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples emphasized that the failure to obtain FPIC was a violation of Indigenous rights as outlined in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Second, the case of uranium mining on Navajo Nation lands provides a stark example of the devastating consequences of neglecting Indigenous consent and knowledge. During the mid-20th century, extensive uranium mining took place on Navajo lands without the informed consent of the Navajo people. The mining operations led to severe environmental degradation and long-term health problems for the Navajo community, including high rates of cancer and other illnesses among miners and their families. The United States, along with mining companies, failed to inform the Navajo people about the dangers associated with uranium mining, nor did they take adequate safety measures to protect the land and the people. The environmental contamination from the mining activities poisoned water sources, soils, and the broader ecosystem, leading to a lasting legacy of harm that the Navajo Nation continues to grapple with today. In response to these injustices, the Navajo Nation has taken significant steps to reclaim and restore their lands, including legal actions to hold responsible parties accountable and initiatives to clean up contaminated sites. This case serves as a reminder of the importance of FPIC and the enduring relevance of Indigenous knowledge in managing natural resources sustainably. Third, and perhaps most recently, the case of Osage Nation versus Enel Green Power highlights the ongoing relevance of Indigenous consent in modern development projects, particularly in the context of renewable energy. The dispute arose when Enel Green Power, an Italian energy company, constructed wind turbines on land within Osage Nation's reservation in Oklahoma without obtaining the tribe's free, prior, and informed consent. The Osage Nation, whose members have a deep spiritual and cultural connection to their land, argued that the construction of the wind turbines infringed on their sovereignty and disrupted sacred sites. The tribe also raised concerns about the environmental impacts of the project, including potential effects on wildlife and natural resources that are vital to their cultural practices. The legal battle that ensued centered on the lack of meaningful consultation with the Osage Nation before the project was approved and constructed. In 2024, a federal court ruled in favor of the Osage Nation, ordering Enel Green Power to remove the wind turbines. The court's decision underscored the importance of securing FPIC from Indigenous communities before proceeding without any development that could affect their lands and cultural heritage. Finally, we look to Bears Ears National Monument, which represents a significant example of co-management between federal agencies and tribal nations, showcasing the true power of collaboration and the integration of Indigenous knowledge in public land management. Established in 2016, Bears Ears is unique because it was the first national monument in the United States to be designated at the request of a coalition of tribal nations. Bears Ears was dealt a significant setback when on December 4, 2017, President Trump ordered an 85% reduction in the monument's size. In 2021, President Biden reaffirmed the original boundary of Bears Ears, but subsequent legal challenges arose. The U.S. District Court of Utah dismissed these cases in August 2023, citing the president's discretion under the Antiquities Act to establish national monuments. These incursions into Bears Ears illustrate the challenges and vulnerabilities that even successful co-management and co-stewardship models can face when political decisions override the commitments made to Indigenous communities. There are various legal and political frameworks that empower tribal sovereignty, Indigenous knowledge, and Indigenous consent. These frameworks are often necessary for tribal nations to assert their rights, protect their lands and resources, and preserve their cultural heritage. Key among these frameworks is the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, which marked a significant shift in U.S. policy by promoting tribal self-governance and reversing previous policies that sought to assimilate Indigenous peoples. Another crucial framework is the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act of 1975, which further empowered tribes by allowing them to manage federal programs and services tailored to their communities. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990 is another critical law that protects Indigenous cultural sites and ensures that tribal nations have the authority to reclaim ancestral remains and cultural items from museums and federal agencies. This law underscores the importance of Indigenous consent in matters related to cultural heritage. Additionally, frameworks like the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act include provisions that require federal agencies to consult with tribes and consider Indigenous knowledge in environmental decision-making. These laws recognize the unique stewardship role that Indigenous peoples have played for generations and ensure that their perspectives are incorporated into decisions affecting their lands and resources. Overall, these legal and political frameworks are essential tools that enable tribal nations to safeguard their sovereignty, protect their knowledge, and assert their consent in decisions that impact their communities. They provide the necessary legal backing for tribes to defend their rights, maintain their cultural practices, and ensure that their voices are heard in the broader societal and governmental contexts. Let's commit to meaningful engagement with Indigenous communities by integrating their knowledge and securing their consent in all business, policy, and federal agency activities. By doing so, we not only honor Indigenous rights, but also contribute to a more just, sustainable, and respectful future. Let's take action now to ensure that these principles are not just acknowledged, but actively practiced in our respective roles. As we move forward, I would like to conclude this presentation with the Cherokee word Gadugi, which embodies the spirit of working together for the collective benefit. Let Gadugi guide us as we move forward, striving to create a future where Indigenous knowledge and consent are respected, and where justice, sustainability, and community are at the heart of our actions. Thank you.